There we go. Okay, it's recording. And participants I can see coming in. Excellent. Okay, we'll just wait for maybe another minute before and let people join. Okay, so we might make a start. So, okay. So it's the May 2024 strategic case study. And my name is Thomas Newman. I'm the founder of VIVA Financial Tuition. And I'm gate crashing Laura's webinar today, just for 10 minutes or so, just to talk about some of the course options that VIVA has if you want to participate in one of our paid courses. Important to mention that today's webinar is a free webinar. It's being recorded. It will be sent out after the session takes place. So tomorrow at some stage, you'll be getting an email with a recording of today's session, and feel free to share it. So this is free. It's going to run for probably under 2 hours today. We were just talking about it before the start of the session, that this pre-scene is actually a little bit lighter than usual, a little bit shorter than usual. There'll be time for questions at the midpoint today, and there'll be time for questions at the end as well with Laura. So she's going to walk you through the first half or so of this pre-scene. Everything else then, the second half of the pre-scene and all of the other content we're going to do, an industry analysis, theory applied from E3, F3, P3, key issues, etc. That will take place from tomorrow onwards. Laura, is that the next session? And that will be part of VIVA's paid courses. And I'll talk about the options you have if you want to take part in one of those paid courses. So, good morning to everyone. I can see participants flooding in from all over as usual. We've a very diverse student group in terms of location. So really appreciate people joining on a Sunday morning. I'm not sure actually if it's, I mean, the times are going to vary greatly depending on where you are. So a lot of people, it'll be Sunday morning. For others, it'll be another time entirely. So thanks a lot for joining. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen to talk about the different course options. So Laura, if you can make me, one second, let's try to do it maybe without the, am I host now, Laura?
I don't think so. I'm about to make you the host.
That's it. So, right, share screen. Okay. So I'll share this link with you after. It's the strategic case study course page that we have at vivatuition.com. And it just talks about the different course options you have in the content of the course. So just at a high level, for the May 2024 strategic case study, there's about 29 hours of content in total between live sessions, recorded content, mock exams. There are 5 mock exams with model solutions based on this pre-scene and this company. As I said before, we have a lot of applied theory sessions. So we take the main theories from E3, F3, P3 and apply them to this pre-scene and talk about the kinds of scenarios that can come up on the day of the exam and how you would respond to them. So, you know, I'll send over this link. There's a lot there in terms of course features and benefits so that you can go through those in your own time. There's some good reasons to opt for a course with VIVA. We're an accredited tuition provider. We've won a number of awards over the years, very, very strong student reviews and satisfaction ratings. And we work with the best tutors. So I'll let Laura talk a little bit about her own background when she starts her, before she starts her presentation. But needless to say, Laura is a top SCS tutor, and she's been doing the SCS with VIVA for a number of years now, and students love her, and we love her at VIVA. So you're in absolutely capable hands if you decide to undertake one of these paid courses with Laura. So I'll just talk about the main options here if you want to participate in a paid course. So there is the standard case study course, and there is the elite case study course. The elite is the better, more complete course. It's also more expensive. The standard is a little bit less involved. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit less intensive and you want to do things yourself, then the standard course is a very good option. So with the standard course, you get access to the 7 live webinars that Laura is going to do, the pre-scene analysis, the first of which is today, the first part. You get the second part as well. You get the industry analysis. You get the live webinars on E3 applied, F3 applied, P3 applied, and you get the live webinar on the key issues. So we outline the top 10 or so key issues as they relate to this case and talk about likely exam scenarios, etc. So all of those sessions are recorded. They're all put up on the website the day after each session takes place. You also get 5 mock exams with model solutions, but you do not get marking included as part of the standard course. So the standard course, $299 is the cost for that. If you want something that is more involved, you get a lot more personal attention, the elite course is a really, really good option. So if you're looking for a particularly high mark, or maybe if you struggled with this exam in the past and you failed it before and you really want to crack it this time, the elite course is an excellent option. So with the elite course, you get everything I just mentioned before that is part of the standard course, plus you get 12 hours of live interactive workshops with Laura. So there's 6 2-hour workshops that you do with Laura, very exam focused. Often they take the form of a mock exam debrief. So you'll be looking at the 5 mock exams that you were doing in detail and walking through those. You also get marking for each and every one of those 5 mock exam attempts that you make. So really, really important. You get access to a private community area where you can discuss things not just with your fellow students, but with Laura. So really, really useful to do that as well. And there's a pass guarantee as part of the elite course, okay? So if you participate in this course and it turns out that you fail, and you shouldn't if you go through all of the different components of the course, but if you do fail, having attempted the course and having attempted the exam, you get free access to the August 24 elite course. So you have that assurance. So the fee for the SCS elite course is $799. Now you can pay that in one of 2 ways. You can pay upfront $799, or you can opt to spread the payments out. So if you want to take that approach, you would pay $199 today, and it will give you access to the course. And then the remainder of the fee you would pay over 7 months. The disadvantage, though, taking that option is that the total fee works out a little bit higher. It's $899 in total. So if you want to make a saving, you would make the one-time $799 payment. But it gives you a little bit of flexibility. If you want to spread the payments out, you can take the installment approach. Okay, so that's I'll send on this link, as I said before. There's a lot more detail there that you can go through in your own time. But if I was to walk through all of it now, I would be wasting your time. Basically, it would take up most of the session. So I'm going to hand over to Laura. Very important to mention that if you have any queries on any of the admin related stuff, or prices or discounts, or access to the community, or access to the course, or anything like that, feel free to drop a message into the chat box. You can address it to me, or send a message to info@vivatuition.com, and a member of the team will get back to you to sort you out. Laura, her area of expertise is case related, it's the content, it's the theory. That's her domain of expertise. So the admin related questions, the access questions, the pricing questions, etc. You can send an email to info@vivatuition.com or just mention it in the chat box, and I'll keep an eye on things and respond to it over the course of this webinar. So, have I left anything out, Laura?
I don't think so. I am happy. I mean, I'll do a little intro, as you said, Thomas, to myself, and then we'll stop about halfway through because I won't be looking at the chat box as we're going through the pre-scene, but then I'll stop halfway through. We can have questions. Questions for me are anything case study related or anything to do with the elite course, what it looks like, what it feels like, what we cover, how students find it. So I can do that side of things. But as you said, anything to do with pricing or where to find things on the site, that's definitely your area and not mine on that side. And then there'll be a chance for questions at the end as well. So we'll do that. So I will just share my screen and hopefully then you can tell me if we are back to Saefwell.
Yep, I confirm. I can see it, Laura.
Excellent. Grand.
Great. Best of luck. Take care.
Thank you very much. See you soon, Thomas. Bye-bye. So a warm welcome to everyone. So we're going to go through, as Thomas said, it's about the first half of the pre-scene today. Now, it's not the first half in terms of page numbers. It's about, I would say, the first half in terms of content, and I'll chat you through that in a moment. But just a little introduction to me. So as Thomas said, I am the strategic case study tutor for VIVA for the May and August 24 sittings. By way of background, I'm a chartered accountant, so I qualified back in the mid-90s, a wee bit long ago, and I also did the chartered tax exams as well. And I love teaching case study, and I love working with VIVA, and we usually have quite good fun on the elite group. I don't know what you think about the industry. I'll be interested in the chat when we get halfway through to see what you think of this industry. But I'm at the infancy of my research as well. So it's quite nice always with the first sitting of the case study that we're learning things together. But I'm finding it very interesting. So what I will do as we progress through the case study debrief, I will pepper it with some of the things that I have looked at in the real world so far and give you some hints and tips on what I think you should do as part of your preparation. So what I'm going to do shortly is I will turn my camera off. We will work through some of the content. Then when we get to about, let's say around about 10:30 or so, I will pause at an appropriate place. Then I can bring up the chat box and see if you have any questions. And we'll deal with those. Then we'll do the next part. And then at the end, I will pop the camera back on again and we can have a chat. And that's how we tend to work. So on either course, if you're coming along to the webinars and you want to join them live, I normally have a little chat with students beforehand, then we do the technical content, and then I pop back on at the end, and so we can have a little bit of an open discussion and chat around that as well. And that's on both courses. That's for the webinars. Obviously then if you're in the elite group, then it's more of a sort of a closed group, and I'm on all the time for that one. So it's good fun. So let's get started and see how we get on. So I'm just going to turn my camera off now whilst we do the sort of more technical side of things, and I'll bob back on for a chat in about, 45 minutes or so. So a warm welcome to the May-August 2024 Strategic Case Study Pre-Scene for CIMA. And as you will see on the screen, the company that we are going to be focusing on is called Saefwell. So I think that spelling is going to perturb me throughout the whole preparation of this, but Saefwell. And as we will have a look at shortly, this is a large, quoted global company offering security services. So if you want to think about some real world comparators up front, I've been having a look at G4S and who else have I looked at? Securitas, for example. Very, very comparable companies to have a look at. Now, before we start in detail, you will notice that there's a context statement at the bottom of our opening page. And we've seen this context statement coming in ever since COVID. It's really helpful, and it's something that students will often ask me. So our examiner recognizes that we all live in a world where there is a significant amount of change globally. However, when we are looking at our exam day scenarios and when we are looking at our strategic case study preparation, we're really not expected to build in global current affairs, whether they be geopolitical events or a post-COVID world, for example. And if you do build those in and they are relevant to the question set on exam day, then the examiner says clearly you will get marks for that. But in order to make it fair, sitting to sitting, you can assume that this is just in a more steady state, even world. We don't need to take interest or impact of those events. So that comes up time and time again. If they are relevant to a particular scenario, yes, you can mention them, but otherwise we assume that current and ongoing global issues do not have an impact. We're going to look at the pre-scene over 2 webinars. Today, the focus will be on what I call that initial industry information, and we will have just a little introduction to Saefwell at the end. The second pre-scene is going to focus more on Saefwell specifically, its services, its finances. We'll have a look at some press articles that are relevant within Barland, which is where we will be located. Now, sometimes I find that students are chomping at the bit to move on to the Saefwell stuff, but we cannot underestimate the importance of what we're going to cover today. So it is all exam focused today. What I will do when we move through the industry information, which I'm going to show you on the contents page here, so mainly this first half, is I am going to set the context for how Saefwell is tested. We're going to see competitor information. This is more information on competitors than we usually get within a case study. And I'm going to flag up technical areas that you need to brush up on. I am going to flag up potential exam day scenarios from the industry information that you can prepare for as well. So it will be very exam focused, and then that allows us, when we come on to that second pre-scene webinar, to focus on the company because we've already got that contextual information. I've already given you a list of the technical areas that you need to make sure that you're comfortable with and brush up on. So what you might want to do is prepare various different to-do lists as we go through this. It might be a list of, for example, exam day scenarios. It might be a list of technical areas. There might be a list as well of real-world examples that you want to have a look at to help you understand the industry and really bring the pre-scene to life for you. Other helpful lists are obviously key pre-scene facts that you're going to draw down on. So, for example, who are our key stakeholders? What are the key risks in our industry? What are the key risks that face the organization? And what else do I like to do? What are our sources of competitive advantage? That's an important one for me. So as I go through the pre-scene, I tend to try to note those down, as well as the more standard things like our strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats, etc. As Thomas has said at the outset, this webinar is recorded. And although this pre-scene is a little light on content, I tend to, if you've ever worked with me, I never really run out of things to say. So please don't worry if you feel that you can't make enough notes as we go along. It is recorded, you can watch it back, etc., etc. So I still feel that there's a lot to cover, and you may wish to watch it back and then have a think about those lists. Success for the pre-scene webinar is if you have a list of things that then you can use to go ahead and target your study for strategic case study in the areas that we would recommend. Now, when we look at the contents page, some of the most important areas for me are as follows. So I always spend a lot of time looking at the industry. We can't afford not to be up to speed on the industry. Another favorite page, you'll hear me refer to this quite a lot as we progress through the course, is the principal risk page. I think that's the single most important page that I look at within the precinct. So we'll focus on that in a lot of detail in the second webinar. Not just the risks that are there, but thinking about the risks that maybe should be there and aren't there as well. And also the news stories down at the end, we've got a couple of those. They're interesting, and I usually find they're quite good for exam day hints as well. It's a relatively short precinct. We've got about 24 pages, so it's relatively short, and there is some repeated content throughout it. That said, I do think it's still the most important document. You've got to have great precinct knowledge. The key at strategic case study is application, but we can't apply the knowledge unless we have a really good working knowledge of it. Okay, so let's move on now to our introductory paragraph. And there's an awful lot to say in the introductory paragraph. So to start off with here, we're told that Saefwell is a quoted company, and they offer advice and support on corporate security and enterprise risk management. Well, breaking this down, firstly, because it's a quoted company, I'm always really pleased when we have a quoted company because it makes it a lot easier, I think, to test certain areas of the strategic case study syllabus. So, for example, one of the benefits of being quoted is they have greater access to capital. We're likely to see strategic initiatives that we are required to give advice to the board for raising capital. And because we're quoted, one of those ways is raising equity finance. So on your list of technical skills that you need to be up to speed of, make sure that you understand a rights issue, for example. So this will be where we offer shares pro rata to existing shareholders for a price. Now, not just the mechanics of a rights issue and what it is, because we are advising strategically to the board, what are some of the things that the board need to think about with regards to a rights issue? So, for example, the price. We have seen quite a lot of questions over recent case study sittings looking at the issues that we would need to consider in doing a rights issue. In terms of equity finance, because we're quoted, if we decide to buy a target company, and I'll talk about that later on, one of the ways in which we might pay for that target company might be through a share-for-share exchange. And we've had specific questions looking at some of the benefits and challenges of offering a share-for-share exchange. So again, another one, because we're quoted, to have on our list of technical skills to brush up on. Because we're quoted, that increased size and reputation is also an advantage, and it can also help us raise other sources of finance like debt finance, etc. But there are drawbacks to being quoted. One of the main ones is pressure from shareholders. Because we're quoted, we're likely to have those larger institutional shareholders, and there will be higher levels of compliance from the stock exchange and from a higher benchmark for corporate governance. So that brings me on to another really important area that you need to prepare for, and that is under P3 and corporate governance. So you need to be very comfortable with best practice for a board structure, what the role of a board in a quoted company should be. You need to know about the basic board committees, what their role and remit is. Even things like agency theory, the board is there to represent not their own interests, but those of the shareholders. And risk management. Risk management is going to be particularly important for this precinct, for this scenario, but is heavily tested as well. Now, I will be picking up on each of those issues as we progress as well. But already I haven't got past the first 5 words, and there's quite a lot to have a look at as well. Now, we're offering advice to companies for support on corporate security and enterprise risk management. So in this case, our clients are going to be other businesses, maybe other companies, but we are having that business to business focus. We are not there for individual consumers. So we're a business to business focus. And essentially, Saefwell is an outsource provider. We're an outsource company. So our customers, our clients are going to have to weigh up whether they want to perform these services for themselves in-house or whether they want to use an outsourced provider. And it's important for us to understand the customer perspective so that we can market to them effectively and we can outperform the competition on that front. Now, the example of services that we offer would range from physical security guarding all the way up to consulting on enterprise risk management. And when we look at those consulting activities, it is advice for both physical and cyber threats. So P3, cyber risk, is going to be a highly testable subject for this pre-scene. So I would recommend that you are up to speed with the entire cyber security risk syllabus from P3. I am going to pick out specific aspects of that as we progress, but I think it's going to be a really, really important area as we move through this. Now, our role is as a senior manager in Saefwell's finance function. So this is the role that we always take on within a strategic case study. We're reporting to the board directly, and that is on special projects and strategic matters. What you will find is often the FD is too busy or needs to prepare something, and we receive an email in terms of giving us approximately 1 hour to prepare for either a board meeting or follow up on a little bit of research or look at the implications of something. So we are in the big leagues by this stage, and this is an idea of the type of role that we're going to have. So we're no longer at operational detail or at that management level. We are looking at the longer term strategic focus. And I find that's a completely different skill for students. We need to step back and we need to think about a broader range of information more holistically. That's why we've really got to engage with this pre-scene. It's the backdrop for that big picture that we are going to have. Risk management, as I've said, from a P3 point of view, is heavily tested in every strategic case study. So we have to have an excellent understanding of the risk management process. And again, I'm going to pick up on aspects of that as we progress. I've already said about the importance of governance issues. It's a heavily tested area. So again, from P3. As you would expect within the finance function, you need to be able to advise on financial strategy. And I've already given a flavour of some of the questions that we will see there. For example, maybe a rights issue or share for share exchange when we're looking at equity financing. From an E3 point of view, we need to be able to evaluate strategies. It's a very common case study question that the board proposes a certain strategy, and then we're either asked to evaluate it. So we could use, for example, the suitable, acceptable, feasible model. So another area to make sure you're comfortable with. Or another common question is that we're asked to evaluate the strategic implications of a certain strategy. Those strategic implications have to be more of the long-term focus, the strategic side. And one thing that I would always say that you need to bear in mind is that you are advising the board directly. So what do the board care about? They're going to care about those most important issues, those high impact issues. And one thing that we want to work towards is being able to prioritize our strongest, our most important points first, because that's what the board is most interested in. So again, we're building a lot of skills into our answer, as well as those more technical nitty-gritty skills. And another really common area is managing stakeholders. Another common requirement is to identify key stakeholders in a particular scenario, describe their interests in that particular scenario, and then make specific recommendations of how we are going to deal with those shareholder interests. So another area from E3 to make sure that you're comfortable with, and that is stakeholder management there as well. Okay, so loads of information here already. Now, we operate on a global basis and we have regional offices in several countries. So I would say that that is a strength, the fact that we are a global operation and we have global reach with regional offices. Our head office, however, is in Barland. So this is the country that we will be referencing the most. And Barland is a developed country, and it has an active and well-regulated stock exchange. So what can we infer from this? That Barland is a developed country to start off with. Well, I think we can reasonably infer that this means that our B dollar, the Barland dollar, is somewhat stable, albeit anything could happen on exam day and we might see some changes there. Currency risk is another area that gets tested. So we might be trading with a supplier or with a customer in a different jurisdiction, and we're going to have to understand the currency risk between our B dollar and that overseas currency. And so from an F3 point of view, couple of areas to get down on your technical list would be looking at things like management of currency risk, international Fisher effect, etc. That's what we want to prepare for there. What about the fact that we have an active and well-regulated stock exchange? Now, this is invariably the case when we have a quoted company within strategic case study, but we can apply the efficient market hypothesis from F3 here, and I would say we are likely to have a semi-strong market. And again, we build that information into quite a lot of our exam day scenario answers, certainly built into the mock answers there. Now, we are told that we prepare our accounts under IFRS, and that's nothing unusual. I think we're told that all the time within strategic case study. So really, that's nothing unusual or nothing to focus on. And actually, we don't really have a look at the accounting in any sort of detail, really, when it comes to strategic case study. So just before we move on, up at the top here, we have, as I said, a couple of real world examples that you might want to look at. Now, from my point of view, you don't want to overload yourself with too much industry research and information. It's really helpful, and I do find it makes the case study more engaging. But what I would recommend is maybe pick one of these companies and have a look at it in a little bit more detail. So for example, I've started to have a look a lot more at G4S here. And it's an interesting one to have a look at. I will talk about it through the pre-scene webinars. It's very, very similar to Saefwell in terms of a large global company. It offers a range of services. And I think some of the most, well, maybe the most interesting stories that I've read so far are a lot of the controversial stories. So for example, if you look at it, they did acquire SecuraCore, so that was an old name. And the thing that stuck out for me, or that I remember associated with the name, is the prison riots within the UK. I think around about 2016, I remember the Birmingham prison riots, and significant reputational damage there. I mean, even as I've just said there, that's the one thing that I remember about SecuraCore and that company. And I do think we're likely to see an exam day scenario where Saefwell is offering maybe a government contract with regard to prison services, for example, or similar, and it faces significant reputational damage. There's also a lot on YouTube for G4S. I have been watching YouTube videos produced by G4S themselves in terms of recruiting staff, so we get to have a feel for what they're looking for in their staff, and various different interviews with staff and clients. So it brings it to life. So that's quite a good one to have a look at. Securitas is another one that you could have a look at. It's based in Stockholm. It's a very large organization, a very large global organization. So they offer, mobile guarding, security consulting and investigations, very similar to Saefwell. But it's a private, it's listed actually. It's listed in Stockholm. G4S is private. So again, we might have less public information on that. And then there's Garda World as well. There might be other examples that you want to have a look at, but I would pick one and really look around that in a wee bit more detail. Okay, so now we have covered our introduction, and hopefully you have a long list of things to look at already. What I want to do now is walk us through 4 key areas. So number 1, we're going to have a look at the services that are typically offered by organizations in this sector. Number 2, We're going to have a look at the competitors in the industry. Now, this one is a little bit unusual for a case study pre-scene. Normally, we only get information on one competitor when we provide the contrasting financial information, but actually we get details of the top 10 companies, so us and 9 competitor companies. So we'll have a look at that. Then item number 3, we will have a little bit more of a look at what is involved in the physical security services. So for guarding, we'll have a look at that. And then we'll wrap up with number 4, and we will look at what is involved in terms of the other side of the business, which is the intelligence-led security services, the consulting. So that's what we are going to cover. So number 1 area, we are going to have a look now at the security industry. And as I said, oftentimes students will say, well, why bother? Do we really need this? And yes, you do. You are a senior finance manager. This is your industry, and this is the minimum industry information that you are expected to know. Your examiner has provided it to you. You require it for the context of Saefwell. You require it for the context of your exam day scenario. What you cannot afford to do is write an answer that doesn't fit with this industry information. The examiner will infer that you're not prepared. The board, if we think about them, are going to see you as not someone that's providing tailored solutions to the industry. This is your industry now. Your role is to know this as a minimum. Now, the first paragraph is not massively interesting. It's a little bit of the history of security services, so we don't really take a lot from that. What is more interesting is to move on to these type of services. So there are 7 services that we're going to have a look at. It's great to have an understanding of them, and then we can use this information when we come on to look at Saefwell's services in more detail, maybe to do a portfolio analysis. So something like the Boston Consulting Group matrix. So what are the areas that are going to be cash generative for Saefwell, for example? What are the areas that have a lot of potential and growth that we might want to invest in? And are there any of these services where the costs involved in operating in these areas maybe don't outweigh any benefits? So that's the type of context that we want to have here in having a look at these services. So the first one is on-site guarding, and certainly this is an example of physical security. It's what I tend to think of first when I think about security companies. So it says here, and we've discussed this, is clients often outsource their physical security arrangements. And I think, again, we all know that and we see it. So let's think about those clients for a moment. What thought process does someone go through before they decide to outsource a service? Now, typically, I think the 3 C's. So we think about cost. Do we outsource because it is a cheaper cost? And then we think about maybe some of the downsides. So another C is control. If we outsource a service, we don't have direct control over that. And how clients tend to manage that with an outsourced service is they will have a service level agreement. So I would be expecting Saefwell to have bespoke service level agreements, contracts with all of its clients that will set out what they must do and what they must not do. And that's going to be a huge area to manage for Saefwell to ensure that we are meeting all of our service level agreement for each client. So that's 2 of our C's, cost and control. What is the other C? And that is confidentiality. When a client decides to outsource something, one of the risks that they take is exposing their confidential business information. And so I think a potential exam day scenario is around maybe Saefwell not managing that confidential information of its clients. Okay, so that's putting ourselves in the shoes of our clients, which I think is very, very important. Now, this on-site guarding can take various different forms. So we can staff reception desks, entrances, and visitor credentials. So I think we've all probably had personal experience of that, patrolling clients' premises, for example, to detect intruders. And then we have security staff within retail shops. That's either uniformed staff that might act as a deterrent against theft, or it could be plainclothes staff looking around to detect, for example, shoplifting or theft of goods in that way. An interesting paragraph for me is down here. So security staff, what they are required to do is report any suspected criminal activity. So they're going to have a level of training to understand what is and what is not criminal activity. But importantly, as we have highlighted here, they do not have law enforcement powers. Now, in the second precinct, when we look at the news articles, you'll see in the towards the end of this precinct, there is a news article about a security guard who does seem to, at least, overstep the powers that they have. And I think this could be quite interesting. It's a fine balance between when that would be appropriate and when that would be wholly inappropriate and lead to reputational damage. So I think we need to think through this scenario over here, that a security staff might overstep their powers. Think about it from a P3 risk management point of view. What internal controls do the board need to put in place to ensure that that doesn't happen with reputational damage? We are an outsourced company. We are a consultancy. Our reputation is going to be everything. How do we manage that? I think that's a highly likely exam day scenario. Now, from having a look at Saefwell, and we'll come on to this, they do offer on-site guarding. We will look at details of the type of employees and the skills and experience that they have. And I think because these guards are customer facing, they are, our brand is likely to be on their uniforms and things like that. They are very, very important to our positioning in the market. So that's what we want to be aware of when we have a look at our staff. Next up, we have mobile guarding. So mobile guarding, as you can see here, this is where we have patrol vehicles, manned patrol vehicles, and they visit a client site at random intervals to do a number of security checks. So this would typically be when the premises is unoccupied, maybe overnight, for example, and they will have a look and confirm that doors are locked, there are no signs of forced entry, everything is as it should be. And then the guards will check in by phone or maybe by radio to say that the checks are done and that everything is secure. So there's quite a lot to think about here. The first one we have flagged over here is the digital strategy that we may have at Saefwell, or maybe we don't have a sufficient digital strategy either. Are we going to look at AI or some form of cyber offering to replace mobile guards? There's quite a lot that you can read on this at the moment. So it may be more using robotics, for example, to replace those human guards, or building in artificial intelligence to help make better decisions. So for example, here, it says that client premises are visited at random intervals. Well, how do we determine the frequency with which you will look at a certain premises? That in itself is a careful balance for risk management. If we visit too frequently, well, then that's going to absorb a guard's time and cost. Maybe it will be less lucrative from our point of view. But if we don't visit frequently enough, is it sufficient deterrent to prevent someone from deciding to break into a premises? Or is it sufficient to detect reasonably promptly when something has gone wrong? Now, that might be a decision for the customer, our client, or they might be looking for advice from us. So how do we at Saefwell appropriately determine that risk, the likelihood and impact? And that's something where perhaps artificial intelligence can help us make better choices in that case. The other thing I thought about here, potentially what happens is when a guard checks in and says, yep, everything's okay, no problem. Well, what if there is a problem? Then that guard is required to stay longer at that site, presumably. They can't leave an unsecured site. And then do we have a backup plan, a schedule of someone else who would take over that guard's roving services? And again, AI can help with that scheduling and that optimization of using our human staff, for example, in the most efficient way. So this might be part of a digital strategy. It might be part of maintaining our cost base. It might be part of offering a better service to clients. Now, for me, it's unclear when we look at the Saefwell information whether or not they currently offer mobile guarding. It's not specifically said. Now we have remote services. And in remote services, this is where clients will pay a fee and they have their electronic security systems monitored. So as you can see in the picture here, we have a control room. So there might be CCTV around a premises and it will flag up if there is any intrusion. And then the people, the trained staff within the control room can respond accordingly. Now that might be by notifying the police. It might be by notifying a contact at the client, for example, to follow it up. So anytime we see training or procedures in this, we need to think about internal controls. This is going to be a huge area to make sure that we have the right staff with the right understanding and the training in all areas, but in these control rooms, for example. I think it's another area where Saefwell could explore its digital strategy. So as you see over here, we've mentioned virtual security operation centers that do provide a similar service. And one thing that I've read about is, again, using artificial intelligence to replace some of the more tiresome or repetitive work that our human operative might be doing. So for example, what did I have a look at? You can have software, AI, that will scan video footage and will flag up if there's something unusual. So again, that saves a lot of human time. It might be more cost effective. Digital systems might be able to scan so much more information than the human eye, for example, could take on. And also using that artificial intelligence to make better informed decisions. So we notify the police and we contact the designated contact when it is really relevant, but we're not bothering them when it isn't relevant. So I think that's quite interesting as well. And a potential exam day scenario there, and I might be getting I might have watched one police drama too many with these control rooms, is maybe that CCTV could be manipulated. So I was thinking if these systems were hacked, which we know, and then the CCTV was providing misleading information, maybe that could be part of, for example, a physical theft. So a link to cybersecurity as well as physical security there. Now, before we move on to the intelligence-led services, there's another physical security area here that sprung to mind for me that isn't listed, and that's with regard to money collection. So I'm sure that we have all seen, whether it be from banks or from hospitality venues or from retail locations, security staff that come along and they are there to do cash collection, so secure cash collections. They have secure vehicles and specially trained staff for that. So it's not mentioned here. I don't know if that's particularly relevant, but it was another physical security service that I thought about. So now we've looked at the initial three physical security services. We're now going to look at the other side of the industry, and Saefwell also do this. So this is the intelligence-led services. And as far as I can see, Saefwell do all of this. So the first one is corporate investigations. So this is where a client approaches a security company and they ask for a specific investigation, and it's very bespoke. It's tailored to the client's needs. And examples that are listed here are counter espionage. So maybe the client has some intellectual property, that might be software, for example, and it's at risk of being copied and abused by a third party. Now, I thought it doesn't necessarily just have to be a third party. It could also be from within the organization, but that might fall under the second definition of fraud investigations. So this is where you're contracted to come in and your role is to collect evidence if there are suspicions about an employee or maybe another internal stakeholder who has defrauded the company. So I would say very specific skills required there for fraud investigations. And another area is if our client is performing some recruitment for a senior position. So not just for any position, for a senior position, you maybe have to do some research into a person's background and character and produce a report vetting that potential appointee. So this is very, very specialized work here. And I would say the staff that we have need to be highly trained. There's going to be a lot of legal parameters involved in this work. So for example, with fraud investigations, you're going to need to understand the benchmark in the law for a prosecution so that you collect the correct evidence. But you're also going to have to do it in a way that is not going to prejudice any potential trial. So a very, very specialist area there. Other legal parameters around this might be with regard to data protection and confidentiality. Other testing areas I was thinking is maybe along the lines of ethics and a conflict of interest. Maybe we are vetting a potential senior person that we know already works for another client. So we're privileged. We see privileged information and we're going to have to maintain confidentiality on that. So as expected, it says trained investigators are required. We will look at those in more detail and they are going to be a key stakeholder. How do we attract and retain the very best people? They are client facing. For the consultancy side of things, our service is our people. They're going to be knowledge workers, and how do we retain those? Another risk of using knowledge workers is they have that tacit information within their head. They have that knowledge and experience within their head, and we don't want them walking away with that to another company, for example. So great areas to have a look at there. The next consulting service we have is risk management. So this is where you're looking at consultancy support provided to businesses, and we would be advising them on strategic risk and also having a look at the identification and mitigation of risks for companies. So just make sure that you're happy with your definition of strategic risk. That's one of the services that we're offering, and we're going to talk a lot about risk management. So make sure that you're up to speed with your CIMA risk management cycle and enterprise risk management. I will be picking up on that in a lot more detail. So security companies in this area actually compete with wider consultants, so management consultants. So competitors might be organizations like McKinsey, for example, and we're competing for this work here. So a very, very different market than our physical security services. And generally, we're focusing on risk management and the development of controls. So we would be preparing reports on weaknesses, for example, and presenting those to the board. So think about the level of competition here. How would Saefwell compete against management consultancies here? As you're going through the pre-scene, think about sources of competitive advantage. Do you think it's a strength that you also offer physical security, mobile guarding, remote services, if a company offers all of those services? Or do you think that is a hindrance? Would a client prefer someone who just focuses on management consultancy? And I'm not entirely sure I know the answer to that, but it is something to think about because we have those very different competitive markets. When we're looking at competitors in more detail as well, we want to make sure we're comfortable with competitor analysis and potential competitor responses. We'll pick that up when we look at, I think it's page 5, when we're going to have a look at competitors. Next up, we have security assessment. So this is going to be a very P3 cyber security focused area. So companies are often, security companies are approached to evaluate existing systems from a cybersecurity point of view and from a physical security point of view. And what the consultants in this area might do is attempt to breach the system. So a little bit along the lines of penetration testing, for example. I think we're going to see areas there. So when you're asked to evaluate the risk, the consultants in this area are obviously going to have to look at the likelihood of an event and then also the impact of the event, present that information to their client. I think it's important to remember, though, that the companies that do this, for example, Saefwell, we are consultants. We won't be the decision makers. The board of our individual client companies are going to have to take that information, and they have ultimate responsibility for their own security systems. We are simply an advisor in that process. So to make sure that you can understand the type of work that we would be doing and understand the client's needs here, brush up, as I said, on that cybersecurity. Remember the steps of protect, detect, and respond. Have a look at the cybersecurity objectives, so availability of information, integrity of information, integrity of processing, and the important one, confidentiality. That's the type of thing that we will be looking at. And we'll pick up on this. We'll talk about penetration testing and ethical hacking in more detail. And then the final service that is listed here is training. So security companies can provide courses for management and staff at all levels within an organization. So again, this is companies choosing to outsource their training in this area to a consultant and leveraging off the fact that the consultant will have a much wider range of skills. So this is an area where I think the two, physical security and the consultancy, those two areas of the business do blend very well because we've got that lived experience and we can provide that experience in our training to staff. And the training ranges from practical training of a client's security guards all the way up to training boards and senior managers on enterprise risk management. So it says over here that Securitas has recently launched a specific certification training for data security centers. Is this something Saefwell could have a look at? So that's a great real world example that might prompt an exam day scenario. I've also been looking at G4S that has launched its G4S Academy, which also looks to leverage that knowledge that it has across the board and share that with organizations that sign up to its academy. So another area that we could look at. Okay, excellent. So we've now looked at 7 potential areas that are offered within this industry. They're quite wide ranging, and I think a real distinction between the physical services and then the consultancy side. You will see that Saefwell are going to offer both of these sides. And if we think about it from a practical point of view, managing the business, those two sides of the business, requires completely different skills. So for us in finance, how we have to manage the physical side and how we manage what is essentially a professional services side is going to be very different. The human resource needs are going to be very different, and the risks involved in providing those services are going to be very different as well. Now we're going to take a wee look at competitors. So let me show you the graph that we have here first. So this is the top 10 security companies by global revenue. So I think we need to expect to see one or more of these companies coming up within our exam day scenario, and it sets the landscape within which we operate. So you can see that down here it includes Saefwell, and then the other competitor that we will see some financial details for later on in the pre-scene is Brotto Security. So both of these are included within these top 10 competitors, and you can see here us, Saefwell, we are the second highest by reference to global revenue. So we are a sizable organization. For me, I think that's a source of competitive advantage or a strength that we have. Now let's have a look at the first one down here. So we have Growbar Facilities, and it is huge by reference to global revenue, much, much bigger than the second one, which is us here. And its sheer size, we'll have a look at the services that it offers, but the sheer size of it may act as a barrier to entry if Saefwell or any of the other competitors decide to move into some of the areas that it offers. So it is a little bit unusual. We have some details up here. So Growbar actually provides security services Yeah, so it's a direct competitor with Saefwell and Brotto in that respect, but it also combines this with the provision of facilities management. And that's a real wide range of services, anything from cleaning and property maintenance, as well as those physical security jobs. So it makes me think of companies like G4S. It's huge. They offer such a wide range of services, so cleaning and catering, or Sodexo would be another one. So Sodexo do everything from catering. You'll often see those in the UK, for example. If you're in a hospital, they outsource a lot of their catering services to Sodexo, and Sodexo also do security. They do prison management. They're huge organizations. So currently, Saefwell don't offer any of that facilities management. We just have the physical security and we have the consulting. Is this potentially an area that we want to move into? Does the sheer size of Growbar facilities create a barrier to entry if we wanted to have a look at that? We're also told here that some companies specialize in intelligence-led services. So the three that we have at the top here, these are the ones that focus on intelligence-led services. And you can see that just focusing on that area, they are the smallest by revenue. So Resumpto, Wiscoprov, and Poldor Safe, they look at those intelligence-led services and also offer training. So I kind of group those together and they are the smallest. The next three, again, we can group these together. We've got Minitron, Kinetic Alarm, and Tremwell Guard. They mainly focus on the physical security, so protecting client staff, on-site guarding, mobile guarding, and that side of things. And then the next three to group together, which includes us, is Gralda, Brotto Security, and Saefwell. And these ones focus on physical security, but also that consultancy service, the intelligence-led service as well. So that's very much how I'm going to break these down. Growbar, I see on its own. Within the next three, we're offering physical security and consultancy. Up here, we just have the more physical security, and here we just have the consultancy. So why are we provided with this information in terms of competitors? Clearly, we need to be up to speed with these guys as key stakeholders. We need to understand our competitive advantage. So how can we outperform any of these ones? We also need to understand their competitive advantage so that we can, again, outperform them. We may see an exam day scenario where a competitor does something and we have to assess how we should respond, or the other way around, we choose a certain strategic path and the competitor responds and we need to evaluate that. Now, we don't have a lot of information on these guys at the moment other than Brotto Security. We get a wee bit more of that. We'll cover that in the second pre-scene, but expect to see one or more of these coming up on exam day. I think one of the most obvious questions that we could get here is considering an acquisition of any one of these guys. So from an E3 point of view, you might be asked to evaluate the strategic implications of making an acquisition. Maybe we want to move into a new area, and instead of doing it organically, we decide to grow through acquisition. And then that leads on to the question from an F3 point of view: how are we going to value one of these companies to acquire them? Typically, when we're looking at valuation, it is a private company because it gives us more to test. So make sure you're comfortable with methods of valuing a private company for an acquisition. That's really, really important as well to have a look at that. And then that would lead on to an F3 question in terms of how we fund it, for example. And also acquisitions, so there's so much to say on this one. For acquisitions, once you've made the acquisition, it leads on to corporate governance questions about the new combined entity. So how do our internal controls need to change? How does our risk management need to change? What is the role of the board in the new combined entity? So we've got all of that detail down there, and that is very, very important. So I think an important page. So what we will do now is we will take a little break before we talk in more detail about physical security services and then the intelligence-led services. So I'm going to pop my camera on for a little bit to say hello, give you a little break from me bombarding you with information. And I'm going to bring up the chat box to see if there's any questions for me or anything that we can help you with at this stage. So I'll just scoot back. I'm sure Thomas has answered most of the questions. So I see welcome from a sunny Ireland. Well, I'm from a rainy Manchester at the moment. I've just had a look at the forecast. It's supposed to rain for about 14 days. So it's lovely to see the locations that people are coming from here. Excellent. So I can see that Thomas has popped on the course page, has confirmed that the session is indeed being recorded. And if you sign up for the course, then you do get access to the full annotated pre-scene as well. Oh, I can see Thomas has asked that. So a little bit more on the international Fisher effect that we mentioned. Now, this is a really good question. And I think one of the things that surprises case study students when we're working together in the elite group is you don't get tested on the nitty-gritty technical detail. It's quite high level and you have to apply it. So when we look at the international Fisher effect, what we're talking about, or what you might get presented with, is that you need to understand that at a high level, inflation rates and interest rates in one jurisdiction can be then impactful in terms of contrast of those rates with another jurisdiction in moving the currency. And all you would need to say is that by looking at interest rates and looking at inflation, you can forward predict the spot rate for currency. So in a higher inflation location, maybe relevant to Barland, we would be expecting that currency to weaken. And then what we have to do is apply that to whatever specific contract that we're looking at. And it depends whether we are having to pay in that foreign currency or receive money in that foreign currency. Also, you would be expected, I would say, to critique the theories. So from an F3 point of view, we tend to look tunnel vision on the theory, whereas we could say that's what it is. It is a theory, and we cannot perfectly predict how foreign currencies will move. Otherwise, we'd be all really wealthy already on that side. So then you can critique it and say it is a theory, it is not perfect. It tends to get impacted by unexpected events, geopolitical events, wars, and that side. So it's a very not watered down way of testing it at strategic case study, but very different from those objective test questions that you've done. One top tip that I always have for students, and it's maybe not particularly sophisticated, you need to be able to explain these in reasonably short sentences. We're looking like 2 sentences, something like that, and then application. And there is a website that I really like using. It's called investopedia.com, and it will give a lot of E3 concepts in a nice user-friendly language that is suitable for the board. And it's worthwhile having a couple of go-to definitions of things like the international Fisher effect, etc. for that. Another great way to prepare yourself for the level of detail you need to go on to is using CIMA's own bank of past papers. And again, you will see they use maybe 1 or 2 sentences talking high level about a particular theory rather than in any detail. So that's how we would do it. And that's a skill to learn. We don't want to do a theory dump, but we want to focus more on the scenario and bring it in that way. So it's just looking at usually relative inflation and how that impacts on currency risk. Having a look down here. So the context statement that I had at the beginning, basically that means that if, say, something happened between now and your real exam or current world events that we are seeing, essentially you can ignore those when it comes to case study and you can be in a little CIMA bubble and answer your question. I think the best way to describe the context statement was for my students during COVID. So we were doing a case study during COVID, and any you know, if we were applying it to the real world, we couldn't talk sensibly about supply chains. We couldn't talk about forward predictions and that side of things. We had to pretend that COVID wasn't happening. And it was almost like the world was business as usual. So that is how we prepare for case study. However, if we do see something that is specifically relevant, then we can mention it. So, for example, we were doing a case study recently where it was a third-party logistics company, and a huge cost for them was fuel. And so in some questions, that fuel cost of lorries and delivery trucks was relevant to mention, for example, the war between Russia and Ukraine and how that had had an impact on fuel prices. So there are certain things where it's relevant, we can bring it in, but otherwise we can assume that we're in more of an academic testing environment. So I hope that explains what we mean by the context statement there. So a question now, how long are the sessions, and is there a different session for elite and the normal course? Okay, so if you are on the standard course, then after this webinar, there are 6 more webinars. So the second pre-scene webinar, which is tomorrow, that's around about 2 hours long. When we include a little time for chatting in the middle and chatting at the end, that's about 2 hours long. The industry analysis is about a 1 hour long session. Then we have the 3 applied series, E3, P3 and F3 applied, and they are by far and away my favorite sessions and the ones that the students say are most useful. They're about 2 hours long, and they are jam-packed with information. So what we do in each of those areas, let's say take E3, we take 4 different technical areas of E3. We give you a little bit of a technical top up on that area. So let's say, for example, it is strategic evaluation. So we will talk about what we mean by suitable, what we mean by acceptable, what we mean by feasible. So a little bit of a technical top up. And then, this is why they're my favorite sessions, we give you a part of an exam standard task. They are all based on previous CIMA testing areas that we have adapted or picked out as likely exam day scenarios. So it's not a full task, it's usually 50% of a task. And we present that, and then we show how that technical area is applied in that exam day scenario. And what I try to do is I try to cover not just the technical application, but also the approach to the question and some exam technique and that side of things. So those sessions are about 2 hours long, and then we have a wee chat afterwards. And then the final session is key issues, and that's about an hour long. So that's the normal course, and anyone on the elite course will get those as well. You can come along live and enjoy those webinars with me, or you can watch them on catch up if you have subscribed for the course. The elite sessions, they are all 2 hours long. So in the first elite session, we just talk about how to prepare for the course, how to break down a strategic case study question, what an answer should look like, and approaches to doing that. And we practice a couple of scenarios with a view to getting you ready to do your first mock. So that's what I would focus on in the first workshop. And then, as Thomas said, in the other workshops, what we do is we take each of the mocks, which you will all have done by the stage of the workshop, and we debrief it in detail. Not just the answer, but how our thought process should be to arrive at that answer. And through debriefing the mock, we pick up on technical areas that maybe people are less sure of, and the students certainly learn more from me. I have only got one perspective, but students will share their answers and discuss it. And I always find I learn lots as well, because students are coming from different job roles, different backgrounds, different experiences, have different ideas. So we end up with really comprehensive ideas for every mock, way more than anybody could write in a single hour. But I find that that gets us really prepared for that exam day scenario. So that's how the elite course works. So hopefully that gives you an idea there as well. And then the recording of this session is uploaded, I think it's tomorrow. So what VIVA will do, will take this session and then upload it. And as far as I know, if you signed up for this one, you get an email with this session on it. So that's where that's going to come from. Okay. Any other questions before we go back and have a look at our security services? Oh, I can see one in Q&A. Let me just have a wee look there. So yes, the video will be uploaded tomorrow and forwarded to you. It's usually 24 hours after the session. Okay. Excellent. So what I'll do is we will go back and we will start to run through this in a little bit more detail. And then again, I'm happy to pop on and answer any questions that you have at the end. Out of interest, what do you think about the industry? Do you think it's going to be an interesting industry? Do you think it's going to be a little bit boring? You're not keen? I think this one's quite good. I quite like it. And part of my research, I started to watch on, it's not very highbrow, but on TikTok and looking at different security guards and that side. I'm so glad. I think it's interesting as well. So there's a real range of sessions that they do. And I think if I was working in Saefwell, I think it would be too risky for my nature because I would be worried about our security guards. You know, they are the client-facing people. They might have the Saefwell logo on them and that side of things. And is one of them going to go rogue and that? Oh, you preferred Robo Bryce. How could you? I don't like this one. My favorite one ever was the gaming industry or the one that was like Deliveroo, Snackwell. But I think this one's interesting. And I would encourage you to have a wee look on YouTube, have a wee look on TikTok to get a feel. So I was watching a video this morning and just seeing the security guards with the body cameras on. So I noticed John there was saying about you think it'll be interesting for digital strategy. And I would totally agree with that. And so the body cameras are there to protect the guards, but also I think to protect the public. So very, very interesting. And the risk management consultancy services, I really agree with that. So I think that's interesting. So I used to work for Deloitte. And I have been using Deloitte as my reference to have a look at that side and see what they offer there. And I think Dean has hit the nail on the head. This is a really broad area. So in one way, it makes me think that we could almost see anything on exam day when you look at the breadth of services that we offer. But also when we compare to companies like G4S or Sodexo or Growbar in this, they offer such a breadth of services. You know, what are we going to look at? And also, as I said, the CCTV side of things, I think I've watched too many police dramas and perhaps getting carried away with exam day scenarios there too. But we do see things that are a bit bonkers in the scenario as well. We need to be prepared for those. So I like it. So far, so good. And I definitely recommend having a wee look at YouTube, TikTok, get a feel for what's going on. I'll reference some of those. Okay, so we'll get back to it now, and then I'll pop up at the end and we'll see if we have any more questions. Oh, and I'll cover what sums up a good answer. In fact, I'll cover that now, and we'll cover that more in a lot more detail when we look at the applied series. What our examiner says time and time again is one, you've got to have a good knowledge of the pre-scene and it's got to be applied to the pre-scene. But what is more important is that your answer is applied to the exam day scenario. So the most important thing is to have a look at the scenario where you get a question and then you get some reference material and you have to apply your answer to that. But you can't really understand the concept of that reference material unless you know the pre-scene. So what I encourage students to do on the elite group is in every elite class, I tend to color code my answer, and the pre-scene information that I've used or drawn down on, I'll have it in green. Now, I don't do what I would call a pre-scene dump, just copying out areas at the pre-scene or that side. It's always very applied. So for example, my favorite page or my most used page in the pre-scene will be the principal risks. So if you were asked to look at strategic implications of something, immediately my brain would go to principal risks. If they're the principal risks, by their very nature, they're strategic. And so I would run down the principal risks in my head and draw out the ones that are going to be impacted. So I might say, from a precinct point of view, one of our principal risks is, let's say, staff retention. This impacts this scenario in this way. So that's a little bit of precinct, but the majority of it is applied to the scenario. So hopefully that answers your question there, Chloe. We need to know it. You do need to build it through, but you're not copying lots of the pre-seen out. Another thing, when we look at the board, for example, if we were to talk about, a finance action that happened, we need to mention the FD specifically, Sabine, or we don't want to say our chief technology officer would do X, Y, Z when we don't have a chief technology officer on that side. So that's how we tend to build it in. It is the essential backdrop from that. Okay. Ah, yes, and I would agree, Dean. There is an excellent sort of, they call it good answer, bad answer, don't they? That's right. That is part of the course to have a look at. And essentially, that's essentially what we do on the elite course. As we progress, because it's different as our skills develop throughout the elite course, what I tend to do is I would encourage every student to look at where their specific weakness is. And then we talk about how to address that weakness so that you can plug that gap in the week until the next course, and we build it up from that. Yeah. And also we talk about people's ideas and maybe why they didn't score as well, or how we could just tweak them to be sharper to the answer. Yeah. So that's what we do. Okay, so I'm going to crack on now, and then I'll bob back and see if we have any more questions. So our third area is to have a look at physical security services. So physical security services is going to require staff. That is our main commodity that we need here. Do we have trained staff? So they are going to be key stakeholders, and they're really important to us because they are client facing. So a lot of the videos that I have watched so far to get a flavor for this industry on YouTube and on TikTok, the trained staff, the physical security staff, are wearing uniforms. They're provided with uniforms. The company logo is on it. So maybe that's the same thing for Saefwell, and they are vital that they can protect our reputation. Reputation is key. Now, as we said in the initial look through at the 7 types of services, we've got a little bit of repetition here. They provide services in reception areas, roving patrols, etc., etc. So that's just repeated. What is more interesting to me is to have a look at the legislation around security staff and the licenses that they are required to have if you are carrying out frontline work on behalf of third parties. So if a company has internally employed security staff, they do not require a license. It says this in the precinct, and that's the case in the UK as well. But if we have security staff that are providing work on behalf of a third party, then licenses are required. Now, this is something that I didn't know before I started to have a look at this precinct, and it opens up loads of testing areas for us. So let's have a look at what licenses might be required for. So you need specific licenses to guard property against theft, different licenses to operate surveillance equipment such as CCTV, and a different license if you are a key holder. Now, that is just a couple of examples. What I have done is I have looked at the UK equivalent, and you can choose to have a look at the jurisdiction where you live. So I researched, it's called the SIA, the Security Industry Authority. That's in the UK. I'm UK based, so that's why I had a look. And I just looked at that on the UK government website. So for a license, you can either apply as an individual or you can apply through your employer. So from a Saefwell point of view, what is safer? Do you want those individuals to apply themselves, or are you going to do the application as their employer? For me, I think the latter is safer. So we will know that we have licensed staff carrying out the duties that we want them to carry out. The license is for a small fee, and it takes a little bit of a time scale for it to go through. The types of licenses that I looked at in the UK were, there were very, very varying. So there was a license for cash and valuables in transit, so those money protection services, different licenses for close protection or door supervision, and then the other ones that we see on the screen. As well as that, picking up on this area, it says licenses are granted to applications who have completed an approved training course and passed the course assessments. So I had a little look on the UK government website again to see what type of qualifications that we're looking at. So it's a prerequisite that you've had the training, you've passed some exams before you can get your license. And there's only certain approved training providers within the UK. And as you would expect, it's different qualifications per different licenses. The qualifications themselves tended to be level 2 and level 3. So what that means in the UK, level 2 is round about that GCSE level, so that school leaver age 16 qualification. Level 3 is equivalent to an A level, so around about that, what we would typically get in the school system at 18. So the qualifications are all below graduate level there, okay? So it means that a very, very important stakeholder for Saefwell is going to be the government's licensing authority. As I said, in the UK, it's called the Security Industry Authority, SIA. Maybe we're going to be introduced to the Barland Licensing Authority. It might be called the BIA, for example, or the BSIA it would be called. But also, Saefwell operate in multiple jurisdictions, and so there may be other licensing authorities and different legislative requirements in other areas. So from a risk management point of view, there is a lot for the board to stay on top of. As we say over here, this is going to be a priority for our risk committee, staying on top of the legislation, understanding the impact, and making sure we have compliance. As you know, if you're looking at a regulated industry, which this is, then our risk tolerance for non-compliance is very, very low. And where our risk tolerance is low, we have to have very strict internal controls. And then, as I've just mentioned, the licensing authority or authorities in more jurisdictions is going to be an important stakeholder. We're going to have to maintain good relationships. Maybe we will see, we've seen this in other proceedings, a proposed change in the law. And do we lobby the government along the lines? There's always ethical implications in lobbying because we will have that self-interest side of things coming through. So really, really, really important to do that. Also, over here, from a risk management point of view, we might see an exam day scenario where maybe security staff have a particular license. Therefore, they are legally allowed to do certain things. What about if they step outside of that? So perhaps we have someone who's licensed but isn't holding the correct license for what they are actually doing. That's an internal control failure on our part, and we might have to look at the implications of that. I think this could be an interesting testing scenario here. Should we use our internal audit function to see if security staff are staying within their legal remit? I would say arguably yes. There's no point having internal controls and then not monitoring. Remember, that's an essential part of the risk management cycle to see if those controls are operating successfully as well. Now, it says here there's no mention of whether these licenses need to be renewed. Now, from a UK perspective, I had a little look at this, and in the UK, yes, your license lasts for a certain period of time, and then you need to renew it. So the Security Industry Authority doesn't renew it automatically. That is something that you need to reapply for. You don't need to retake the training, but if the legislation has changed with regard to your specific license, you might need to do some additional top-up training for that. So I do think there is a lot of potential exam day scenarios that we could see here. And the authority themselves, as well as double checking that someone has carried out the training, also is having a look to see if the person has been convicted of an offence that would be inconsistent with them carrying out that security work. And that side. And just over the page, you will see that if a license holder has a change of circumstances, so maybe they've been charged or convicted with a criminal offence, then they need to notify the licensing authority. So what internal controls does Saefwell need to have in place to ensure that that happens? So loads of exam day scenarios here. I think a lot of them around P3, around poor internal control environment. That would include licenses that have lapsed and maybe not been renewed, flagging the need for additional training and ensuring that's happened, and ensuring that people who need to have notified any change in circumstances there. Okay. Now we're going to have a look at this paragraph here. So global security companies like Saefwell and Growbar Facilities tend to restrict the provision of physical security services to countries where their staff are likely to be safe. So they're unlikely to be at serious risk of physical harm. So the word that I would hone in on here is the word tend to. So is that indicating that we might see an exam day scenario where perhaps for economic reasons, it might be in the interests of our financial statements, in the interests of our shareholders, we do decide to send staff where there is some risk of physical harm to them. You might be asked to contrast that with the mission, the vision, the values. You might be asked to look at the strategic implications of that. I think it's a really interesting ethical situation as well. And it looks at maybe a conflict between different stakeholder groups. Are we prioritizing the fact that we're there to maximize shareholder wealth, or are we there to look after our employees as well? Now it says here, security staff are not expected to carry weapons such as firearms, pepper spray, and batons. So again, a potential exam day scenario here where maybe a member of staff is carrying a weapon that we have explicitly told them not to do. So again, outside of our internal controls, or when we're looking at this industry, I do think a likely exam day scenario is going to be along the lines where we decide to take on a contract for providing staff to a prison, or there might be an exam day scenario, as we say over here, where Saefwell decides to enter the private prison market. Now, this was quite interesting to me. I think there's loads of ethical issues here, loads of reputational issues, and I would encourage you to have a wee look at the private prison market. There's plenty to read in terms of the US prison system, and very controversial articles with regard to ethics. So most prisons in the UK are run by private companies. So the government, whether that be state government or the national government, obviously governs sentencing laws and that side of things. But because the prisons themselves are private, these companies have an interest in sentencing laws. They have an interest and an impact on things like parole, hearings, and there's a lot of controversy around how they charge for prisoners. Is it based on the length of stay, in which case it's in their interest to have longer sentences, to have parole hearings that aren't successful, and we have a real ethical debate. So I read about that first, and then I thought, I wonder, does the UK have any private prisons? And to be fair, I was quite surprised that there are private prisons in the UK. I think there's about 14 of them at the moment, and they are operated by Serco, G4S, and Sodexo. So very interesting, and I think I think it would be quite a challenging exam area, but a rich ground for ethics and reputation. And there are some, I mean, treat them with caution when you have a look on YouTube, etc. Some quite upsetting videos of maybe poor treatment of inmates within prisons and also poor treatment of staff. And that could be our Saefwell staff. And as I said, I had a look at, because I remembered them, G4S and Securicor, when things didn't go well and the prison riots and the fallout from that. So I think we could be on the money here in terms of things that we could look at. And obviously that ties in with the carrying of weapons and what would be expected and safe for staff, potentially, in different jurisdictions. We also might see an exam day scenario where we have a potential client that is going to mean that we're going to send staff to different countries that presents a higher risk than usual. And again, as I said, what would we do in that situation? Where would the balance be between protecting our staff and the interests of the bottom line? Also, any new jurisdiction opens up new regulations, new licensing, new do's and don'ts, new cultural norms. Do we have the experience to do that? Reputational risk is key. So again, have a look down here. Anything that our staff would do that could put them in harm, or that they would do for excess reasonable force, we'll talk about that in a moment, could cause reputational issues. And another reputational issue over here, think about how we protect our staff. Do we present them in dangerous situations? Now, it doesn't have to be in another country, and it doesn't have to be in even an overtly dangerous situation. So again, my YouTube research, I found an interview that the BBC carried out in the UK with a young female security guard. And she was describing both the physical abuse and the verbal threats that she receives on a regular basis, sexual advances, all of that side of things. So how do we protect our staff? How do we prepare them for that? And one of these dangerous situations I was thinking of that could be quite topical and tie in with environmental issues, for example, is if we look at policing of events or security guards in events where environmental protesters decide to get involved. So in the UK, we'll see Insulate Britain, for example, Just Stop Oil. There are many, many examples there. And that could be a potential exam day scenario. Protecting our staff, what about our reputational risk, how we manage the fallout of any staff there. So let's have a look at this in a little bit more detail now, this idea of reasonable force and what our staff might do to protect themselves. So it's important to note that security staff don't have the same powers as police would. The police in, I would say, all jurisdictions, they have the power to arrest individuals if they reasonably believe that they are committing an offence. And I have watched actually quite a few TikTok videos on this where they're not particularly pleasant. It's people have gone along with the intention of, it looks like they're trying to goad security staff into acting unreasonably. And it's interesting to see how the security staff will keep a level head in those situations. They often say, you cannot be here, you cannot film here. I think one of them, I watched someone was flying a drone over a premises and the security guard reasonably is saying, you can't do this. But the person who is taking the video, obviously there with the intention of sparking some kind of outburst, is saying, well, this is not illegal. You can't phone the police. You can't stop me. And then I've watched other ones where security guards have called the police, but no real crime has been committed. So it is really a very delicate balancing act between staying within the law, informing the police when you need to do so, but not informing the police when you don't need to do so. So that leads into the need to train staff to contact police appropriately and our internal controls that we would want them to do. So essentially, we want them to observe and record events, but stay at a safe distance. Security staff are not expected to use force to subdue a thief or an attacker. So again, are we going to see an exam day scenario where someone has gone rogue and do this? And what complicates it even more is that our security staff have the benefit of the general law here, where all citizens can use reasonable force in terms of self-defense. So are we going to see a scenario where it's a little bit of a blurred line? Was it self-defense or was it unreasonable force? And in any event, how does that impact us from a reputational point of view? I think this is quite a likely exam day scenario. Again, have a look at the news article, one of the news articles towards the end. And if this happens, what position does Saefwell take? Do we back our member of staff? It's really important that we're showing that we're supporting our staff, because all of the other members of staff need to feel safe and know that Saefwell has their back. Or do we need to manage reputation and come down hard on any staff that step outside of the procedures that we would put in place for them? There's going to be no easy answer there. So I think that is quite a good exam day scenario here. What do we do if a member of staff either uses unreasonable force or steps outside of what they are allowed to do under the law? So security companies have to carry out their own risk assessments before they will commit staff to this. So this is something that we have to do within Saefwell. So again, make sure that you are all over your CIMA risk management cycle, your enterprise risk management. Remember the steps of identifying potential risks, then assessing those risks, both in terms of likelihood and impact. Let's think about how we might do that in terms of what information we have. And then we will have to compare that risk to our risk appetite. And then we need to bring that risk down to an acceptable level. That might mean that we choose to refuse to accept certain assignments if we feel that we cannot bring that risk down. So another thing that we use quite a lot in case study is the TARA risk model, T-A-R-A. So the refusing to accept would be A for avoid the risk altogether. The R within TARA would be to reduce the risk, and that would be where we try to mitigate through controls such as training or adopting safe work practices. And we've got examples of some of the controls, the physical controls that we would have here. So for example, from a health and safety point of view, high-vis jackets, helmets, appropriate boots. Even the provision of a uniform is a physical control for reception staff. And then other controls can be as simple as having appropriate communication channels for people to report incidents and see what they're doing. In a particularly risky event, if we were doing risk assessment and we were looking at reducing that risk, what else could we do? I was thinking we might use more experienced staff, more senior staff to mitigate the risk. They're likely to make better decisions. If it is a high-risk event, we can simply increase the number of staff that we send. More staff on the ground is likely to reduce the risk. And also we might need to offer top-up training. And in all of these, as with all internal controls, there's a cost associated there. What about a cost-benefit analysis on that? So we may see questions around that. And picking up on P3, an internal audit, again, could our internal audit be used to confirm whether these practices, so for example, these controls that we've listed, are being adhered to? And I would say the answer is yes. Internal audit gets tested quite a lot, so it's definitely another one to have on your list. Make sure you're comfortable with the role and remit of internal audit. Make sure that you know how to suggest sensible tests of control that are targeted to see whether a control is working or not working, or to look for risks where there should be a control and a control is missing. So that is an important area as well. So moving on now, we're going to have a look at our intelligence-led services. So this is the other side of the industry and the other side of Saefwell's business as well. So here we're using specialist consultants, so a different type of staff with different training and different experience. And because clients are looking for that bespoke advice that we referred to earlier, these members of staff have to have considerable experience in order to do this, okay? So what type of thing might a client be looking for? So they might want some reassurance that their security systems are effective. So for example, no one can get access without being detected. Now that might be for physical security or from a cybersecurity point of view. So the type of activity that our consultants might carry out. So we might have a team of security experts that have a good knowledge of the techniques that are used by criminals or perhaps by our clients' competitors to gain unauthorized either physical access or cybersecurity access. And the ultimate deliverable to the client is a form of assurance report. So it would be some evidence, a report showing the weaknesses, presenting that to the client senior management, and either showing some evidence and presumably making recommendations there as well. So we know that our competitors in this area would be management consultants. So people like McKinsey, Deloitte, PwC, for example. And again, I would select one of those to have a look at in a little bit more detail. The other thing that I would say, as with any risk management here, is, and it's certainly been borne out by my research so far, it's referenced quite a lot, the threats are constantly changing. So it says up here, the security team of experts would use the same techniques as criminals, but take cybersecurity, for example, this is always evolving. So how does Saefwell put itself in a position to stay up to date with current threats? This led me to think about an interesting question. It is in our interests, potentially, to knowledge share with some of our competitors, to pool together our collective knowledge to better serve our clients. However, there is a huge downside to that, clearly, because we could be giving away some of our intellectual property there. So I don't think we would do that, but it's an interesting scenario. The higher level of collective knowledge, then the better we are. And as I referenced before, G4S has developed its academy to help look at knowledge share, both internally within the organization, but also offering that as an external scenario. Another thing, if we're making recommendations in terms of how to address these weaknesses, I thought maybe this is a synergistic acquisition. So if we look at cybersecurity, we might recommend that there are certain solutions that they should do. Perhaps we're going to make an acquisition of a more solutions-focused company in cybersecurity and cross-sell that way. From a P3 point of view, looking at cyber policy, perhaps one of the areas of advice required will be with regard to compliance audit. So one example there is an SOC2 audit, so that's Systems and Organization Controls audit. That's how you would say third-party certification. For service organizations, or from P3, you might remember the AICPA cybersecurity risk management reporting. So perhaps we could offer audits or advice on that so that our clients can provide that information on the effectiveness of their cybersecurity. Now, one very interesting area over here, and I think this is a likely exam day scenario, is yes, we're providing cybersecurity intelligence-led advice for clients. We're holding ourselves out to be an expert, but what would happen if we had our own cybersecurity breach? We would have all the usual testing ground about the internal implications of such a breach, but the reputational impact, I think, would be very significant for our own intelligence-led services. So how could we advise on cybersecurity if we hadn't managed our own? Alternatively, could we flip that round to say, even with the best cybersecurity in the world, incidents do happen, it's how you respond to those incidents that count. So maybe we could show exemplary response to that cybersecurity. So I think that is a likely exam day scenario as well. Another thing that a client might request is to have a look at online security systems. So very similar to before, what we want to use or what our consultants would use is similar techniques to the hackers, and we want to look at the system's vulnerabilities and shortcomings and allow a solution to be developed. So when we're looking at attacks that might disrupt a client's IT systems, it makes me think of things like DDoS attacks. So make sure that you can you have a broad understanding of what a DDoS attack is. Distributed denial of service. Another thing would be ransomware there. Very disruptive to services. And we see those tested quite a lot. So have a high level understanding of what they are and some of the implications of those. And again, that paragraph makes me think about an acquisition. Would there be synergies of either an organic move into selling products as a solution or making an acquisition in those areas as well? Now, from the business side of things, having a look here, we're told that these assignments could be relatively unstructured, and we're provided with an example. So a client might decide to locate a new factory, maybe in an emerging or inexpensive location, because the fact that it is an emerging economy means that they can get, say, cheaper labor, for example. And the client might be concerned about financial risks of investing in that country and also potentially health and safety risks. So the financial risks here would be where the client requires advice on currency risk. So for example, the movement or the more volatile inflation in one country and how that might impact on then currency risk and your financial risk in line with that. So we might look at that for a client, and also it could be an issue for Saefwell itself. In order to do this, we would carry out a mixture of desk research and also potentially send staff to have a look at the political, economic and health risks. So that ties into where is it potentially safe or not safe to send our staff. I suppose it depends on how volatile the situation is and that side. Now, putting on our finance hat, which is our role, when I look at how unstructured this is exactly what I thought. I was thinking, how would I write the engagement letter or the contract with this client? Because this used to be a problem in my job role all the time. If a client isn't clear on what they want or need, how do you set the fee? What happens if there's scope creep? How do we define what we are going to do and what we aren't going to do? It makes it very difficult to price and very difficult to write a contract. And as well as that, if we're doing risk assessment, think about there's a risk that what the client thinks we're doing and what we're actually doing are two different things. So we see this in any traditional assurance engagement or audit engagement. The client can think that you're coming with a rubber stamp by saying, these are the risks and this is fact. But we know that this could only be based on the information available at the time. And it depends on the agreed scope of work and the fee that the client has asked us to have a look at. So what if the client say, let's go for a bronze level fee, wants desk research only, but is expecting to have a gold level service where we've looked holistically at everything, including going and visiting the location. So I think there is a business risk for Saefwell there in that unstructured work. Maybe the client is expecting a rubber stamp on something. We say something's relatively low risk and then an event happens. And that ties in that understanding of enterprise risk management. There are no guarantees. We can assess risk, but we don't have a crystal ball. So I think we are likely to see a scenario there. And very much think about the specialist level of skills that are coming through. These guys are going to be key stakeholders here. And because of this, let's have a look at them. So security companies, when we're looking for our consulting staff, I think it is a massive strength if they have, as it says here, a variety of backgrounds. A variety of backgrounds, that sort of diversity of experience is going to be essential for better risk identification and better risk assessment. If our consulting staff are all exactly the same, well, then they're all going to have the same frame of reference and they're all going to have the same blind spots. Whereas we will need to have wide background, especially because we have a global client basis and people need to bring together that wide experience. So not everyone has the same blind spot, not everyone has the same strength. So that's really, really important. So training and experience are very important, such as well as a technical area of your area, we need to have auditing skills. And those auditing skills are required for IT security, but also fraud investigations. So the staff that we're looking for have to have, let's say in audit, a good understanding of the subject matter. If you were auditing an IT area, I mean, I couldn't audit an IT area. I know how to audit, but I don't have any IT knowledge. So you've got to know what you are looking at so that you can spot flaws. And also you've got to have audit skills. That's a specific skill in itself. And for the fraud investigations, we've touched on this before as well, subject matter skills for the fraud, but also highly trained in evidence gathering. What can you do legally? You can't afford to prejudice a case. So very, very important here. So again, it goes on to describe what is essentially social engineering here and phishing for penetration testing there. Okay. Now, the intelligence-led services are going to focus on strategic and governance matters. They are going to be advising clients' boards with the assurance that they are paying for, the assurance that they require. And as we said, we are often competing with management consultants, so like McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Gartner, and then the professional services firms, Deloitte, PwC, etc. And there are plenty of smaller boutique firms, especially in the cybersecurity side. Now, just to point out this word assurance. Now, assurance is a tricky business, as anyone who has ever been on a financial audit will know. What sometimes clients don't realize, and this might be the case, we've got to make sure our clients of Saefwell understand this, there is no absolute assurance. We cannot say, yes, you're doing the right thing, or if you do this, your risk is reduced to zero. So there is no absolute assurance. And typically, when we look at assurance engagements, we have two levels of assurance. One is a limited level, and one is a reasonable level. And it's interesting to me to have a look at this. So a limited level of assurance, sometimes we call it negative assurance. It tends to be what we do. I don't know if any of you have ever been involved in due diligence projects, and you have a look at information and you express your assurance opinion by saying, nothing has come to my attention to show that you shouldn't do this, or nothing has come to my attention to show that this is particularly high risk. So it's expressed in a negative way, and it's a relatively low level of assurance. Higher paying engagements will give what we would call a reasonable level of insurance. So we can say that there are no excessive risks. You're not giving absolute assurance, but you're expressing it in a positive way. So that's something, again, maybe it's a bit of an audit background there, but I was focusing on that, and it ties into managing our clients' expectations of what they're getting and also managing our fee as well. So as we said before, when we looked at competitors, when we're looking at E3, how can we stand out in this area? If we're competing against management consultants, accountancy firms, and boutique firms, is it an asset that we have the physical side, physical security side of our business, or actually does that deter from that business? Do we have any innovative technology that is going to help? Can our sheer size help us leverage the brand? So make sure that you think about sources of competitive advantage. We have an idea from having a look at the industry so far. And then in the second pre-scene, we're going to be able to tie that in to Saefwell more specifically. And in intelligence-led services, again, similar with cybersecurity, if Saefwell is giving advice on anything, then it has to have best practice internally. So does it manage its own strategic risk well, for example? Reputation is key for professional services firms. So I would be expecting a very hierarchical structure, very experienced staff there. Now, if you do want to have a look at maybe one of these guys offering, let's say, cybersecurity risk, I've had a little look at Deloitte cyber and strategic risk area, and there's quite a lot on there. You don't need to read everything, but just have a little look. So they've got some reports on cyber risk. They've got reports on enterprise risk management, and actually surveys from UK companies as well. They look at the issue of insurance and cyber risk. So I think our intelligence-led services could also help clients procure the correct level of insurance for their business. And also, there's a Deloitte article that talks about taking digital risk, so your exposure, but being able to work with that as an upside risk as well and turning it into a digital advantage. So again, very, very popular from a CIMA testing point of view. So now we had a look at those 4 areas that we set out to have a look at: services offered, competitors. We've had a little look at physical security and intelligence-led security. I hope you have a list of technical areas that you are going to prepare, and we've got some exam day scenarios. So we'll just close off this first webinar by introducing ourselves to Saefwell. So founded in 1920, so we are a long-standing business. So we've been around for over 100 years, and initially we specialized in physical security services. We have 460,000 security staff worldwide. So that is huge. Securitas, I think, by comparison, has 300,000 staff. And we operate in 74 countries. So huge global reach. Again, by comparison, Securitas was around 50 to 55 countries that it operated in. So as well as physical security, they are a major provider of intelligence-led risk management, and we have 22,000 risk management consultants. So this is our staff-based security staff and our risk management consultants. They are going to have different needs, different controls, different cost base, require different management. There are 2 groups of staff. Now, our security staff operate in 74 countries, but the majority of our risk management consultants, they are in our head office in Barland, as well as 4 regional offices throughout the world. They travel to assignments, and we've already seen that. Depending on the level of work they're doing, they may travel to assignments. So we do have worldwide coverage. And I think that, again, is a strength, maybe a source of competitive advantage. However, most of the management consultancy firms also would have that worldwide coverage. We've been working in consultancy for at least the past 20 years and have experience of this in 132 countries. So again, a source of competitive advantage there. We quoted in 1991 and provide our own training programs to security guards. Now, this bit is quite interesting to give us now our first inkling on how we position ourselves in the market here. So we offer training to exceed the minimum requirements for licensing purposes in all home countries. So let's think about that. We are going over and above. Is that good risk management strategy? That is going to protect us against any sudden change in the law. If we're already exceeding the law, then we have that little bit of a buffer there. However, it is also going to increase our cost base. So increased training is going to increase our cost base, one, to pay for the training, and it's going to be downtime when that staff, when the staff are training rather than being out performing their jobs. So I would say Saefwell must always be thinking about the cost benefit analysis of this training, the cost versus the benefits from reducing some of those risks that we've talked about for operating outside of a license, operating outside of the legal remit, and the fact that the security guards are the customer facing the general public all the time there. And as well as having higher levels of training, Saefwell also pay well and exceed competitors' hourly rates by as much as 10%. So again, let's think about a cost-benefit analysis of there. This higher cost base, is that going to make us less flexible in the market? Does it mean that we are going to have higher prices charged to customers? Or are we thinking more strategically in the long term that if we pay well, then we will retain staff? And if we retain staff, then we're not losing all of that investment that we are making on training there. So it may reduce risk overall. So this is our first inkling here into how we may choose to position ourselves. And that is where we're going to end the first pre-scene. So in the second pre-scene, we will have a look specifically at the services that Saefwell operate. There's a lot of repeated content there that we've already covered. So we'll move quite quickly on to have a look at the mission, vision, and values. We'll have a look at them. We will compare them to real-world comparators. We will meet the board and we'll look at the board composition and the board committees. My favorite page then, we'll look at the principal risks, both what's there and what's missing. The financials, we will have a look at financial analysis. To be fair, it is important that we have a look at it, but I don't really draw down on the financials a lot. So I'll make sure you know the top, let's say, half a dozen figures that I would tend to use. We'll have a look at our share price, and then we'll finish off in some of the most interesting areas, which is having a look at that news stories. But I really hope this has given you a good starting point for things that you need to look at and a lot of potential exam day scenarios as well. Okay, so that, other than a couple of questions, is where we're going to leave it today. So if you're leaving us now, thank you so much for your attention. But what I am going to do is have a look at any outstanding questions or see if there's anything else that you need to discuss. So let's have a little look. So would I refer to board members by their name and position in a question? Yes, I definitely would. So if, for example, I'm talking about something in finance, I would mention Sabine. If I'm talking about something for our CEO, I think the name is Greg, you have to forgive my bad memory at this stage, this early stage, I would mention them. So I would definitely know the names and what their remit is, because what I find you'll have a much stronger answer if you're, for example, setting out, what could it be? How you're going to manage a stakeholder's interest in something. Often it's a specific method of communication, and it's much stronger if you will say who would do it. So is it appropriate for maybe one of our chief operating officers to do it, or the CEO, and mention them by name? And we would need to know what's in their remit in order to make the right recommendation. So yes, I would do that. They're our colleague, for example. Excellent. Oh, good. I'm glad that you find it interesting. And thank you. I hope that breaking it down does make it easy to understand. Those of you that are going to go ahead and work with me, I said it many, many times before, but my kids always laugh at me and say that I can roboticize anything and try to break it down, but it helps me then remember and engage with it. So let me just see if there's any other questions. So yes, again, the recording will be uploaded. No problems there. Excellent. Good. Oh, I'm glad you're feeling a little bit better. So in what scenarios do you use the what, how, and what line of thought? It's very, very specific to different scenarios, Saviour. So one of the things that I am paranoid about in strategic case study is that we have to read the requirement. And I put a lot of focus on practicing what our thought process should be to break down that requirement beforehand. So I will cover that specifically when we do the applied series. So that will be available to everyone, how I would break down a question. And then in the elite groups, we do the same thing, and we can have a Q&A and answer things. Normally, there are not exactly standard questions, but ones that we can anticipate that will come up all the time. And we will look at how to break those down. But there's no sort of general rule on that one, I would say. We'll look at that more specifically. For the standard course, you do get the pre-course work as well. So you get that good answer, bad answer one, and an overview of the objective test areas as well. In terms of sitting the case study in August and details of the package there, that's not something that I have, unfortunately, for me here. You would have to email info@vivatuition.com, and they will have the dates, the prices, etc. for the August sitting. for that one. If you are doing the August sitting, though, the webinars that we do for the May sitting are recorded, so there are no live sessions for the webinars. However, we do a couple of drop-ins so that students, even if you're not on the elite course, we can have chats like this. I can answer any questions and I can see how you're getting on. So Ezekiel, I would email info at vivatuition.com there. Okay. The first mock on RoboBryce, that is not the first mock. The first mocks for this course will not be released until tomorrow. So they are not released until after this webinar. So that's why they're not there. The RoboBryce ones are just placeholders on the system. Clearly, that is the last sitting. So the mocks are, especially for the first sitting, being written as we go along, but I think mocks 1 and 2 are finalized now, and my understanding is that they will be uploaded tomorrow. So don't worry about that. Okay. So I don't see any more questions. Oh, so when are the notes on key issues, etc., available? They are issued, as far as I'm aware, close to the webinar. Again, for the first sitting, you know, we do get the content in advance, but a lot of it is still being prepared. So the applied series and the mocks and the key issues will all be released through the progression. They will always be there just on or before the webinar, and then the recordings for everything is uploaded approximately the next working day. Yeah. So if you're on the second sitting of a pre-scene, obviously everything is available for you at the beginning of the course, but it is different for the first sitting there as well. Excellent. The second debrief is tomorrow, Monday evening, and it is 7 o'clock in the UK. That's the time of the second pre-scene, 7 o'clock in the UK tomorrow. So it's really nice to see we have someone joined up for the elite course. Will the mock exams for marking be submitted before the mock and the debrief sessions? Yes, so I will run you through what I would recommend when we have our first workshop. But the idea is that you'll come to the first workshop and I'll give you lots of tips for mock number 1. Then you do mock number 1, submit it, and you will hopefully have your marked script back before the debrief session. So that's the plan. And one of my first agenda items in the elite group is to make sure that we all have a suggested workflow. Now, there's no strict deadlines for the mocks for marking, but most students want to do the mock before they have the debrief. Otherwise, it's a little bit too much of a spoiler and you can't participate as much in the discussion. So Eliza, that's how that's going to work. What I will do, if you're in the elite group, you will have the elite circle chat as well. I'm going to have a look at the workshop dates, and then I will suggest the time frame by which you should submit the mocks. And I very much would encourage the guys, all of you, not just the elite group, if you do a mock, then if you're on the standard course, go through that answer in detail, see where you went well, where you went less well, then work on plugging your weaknesses and then do the next one. In the elite course, that's what I recommend that you do it. You get your script back, we go through it in the workshop, and then you take all of that forward into doing the next mock, because you get that slower progression of performance and you get more out of the mocks that way. Obviously, we can tailor that to different people's needs, you know, if you're on holiday or anything like that. That's what we're looking for there. Okay, excellent. So I'm really glad that you signed up for that. How soon should you attempt the first mock exam? Okay, that's an absolutely excellent question. So what I would say is ideally you want to be finished your mocks, I would say a week before the real exam. So work backwards from that. And I would say spread the mock performance out evenly. The danger of leaving all the mocks to the end is that you're not getting enough exam experience. And the danger of starting too soon is, or doing them all at once up front, is you haven't allowed your skills to grow. You haven't allowed your pre-scene knowledge or your industry knowledge to grow. So I would probably do the first mock exam. If it were me and you were on the standard course, I would probably do it after you have your maybe E3 applied, because I'll give a lot more tips in terms of how I would structure an answer. You will see, albeit written out sort of in bullet points, but what a typical answer looks like. And that might be quite a good time to do your first mock. Or you can just have a go with the first mock and then compare and contrast with some of the other things in the applied series. The key thing, though, is I would space them out. So maybe try to do a mock per week, but work on how you can address anything that didn't go well for you after one mock before you try the other one. Hopefully that makes sense. It is about a slow progression of improvement rather than getting all the mocks done. So is there anything I'd recommend memorizing from the pre-scene? Yes, there is actually. So for me, I would learn the principal risks for sure, because I use them so much as a little checklist and run through those. There's a couple of the bits within the financials that I would tend to know. So for example, gearing ratio, an idea of what interest expense percentage, interest, cost of interest that we have. What else do I tend to use? The beta from the share price graph. I would always know that one. The names of the people on the boards and who sits on what committee, I would know that. And also, I think you'll learn this anyway through doing the mocks. For example, how many staff we have. So the 460,000 security staff, 22,000 consultancy staff, the areas in which we operate and we don't operate, what the competitors do. You can look it up in the exam, but it's much better if you don't have to. They're the type of things that I would memorize. But what I think you'll find, especially if you pace your preparation for case study and you engage with the mocks and do the mocks that way and brainstorm scenarios. I'm a massive fan of brainstorming as preparation. You will just naturally learn the things that you are referencing a lot. So that's what I would do in terms of that one. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay. Anything else I can help anyone with today? Right. Good. Well, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Well, depending on what time zone you're in, depending how much of Sunday is left. And hopefully I will see some of you on the second pre-scene tomorrow. And we'll get stuck in and have a look at Saefwell in more detail. So take care, everyone. Work hard. And if this is the last time that I see you, very, very best of luck in your strategic case study again. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.